Welcome to the Doctor's Life Podcast with Ansari-Winn, MD. Dr. Diane is a stress and burnout coach for doctors. With her 15 years of experience as an anesthesiologist and certification as a physician development coach, Dr. Diane coaches doctors on how to live a rich life of purpose, fulfillment, freedom, and happiness both at work and at home. In this podcast, Dr. Diane brings together doctors and researchers that are experts in health, wellness, stress, and burnout, as well as doctors that have been successful in clinical practice, academics, non-clinical careers, and business to share their expertise and life experience so that you can live your own life purpose, fulfillment, freedom, and happiness. To get free access to a PDF and video of easy and proven strategies that melt stress away and keep it away, simply register at www.dianeansari-winn.com. That's www.dianeansari-winn.com. Now here is your host, Dr. Diane Ansari-Winn.
Hi, it's Dr. Diane here, and I have a quick request before we jump into the show. If you like this podcast, it would mean so much if you took just a moment to hop over to iTunes, write a review, and rate the show. That is how other people will find the show and get the same great value from it that I hope that you're getting. It just takes a few moments to click a star rating and write a quick note. Now, on to the show.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Doctor's Life Podcast. We're interviewing Dara Kass today. She's the founder of FeminEM. She's an emergency medicine physician and an advocate for the advancement of women in medicine. She's an amazing person. She's passionate about creating a community where women in emergency medicine can act as champions for one another, which I am all about because we need to really advocate and support each other. She's a graduate of SUNY Downstate Medical School and Kings County Hospital's residency program. She's previously the director of undergraduate medical education at NYU, and now she serves as associate professor of emergency medicine at NYU Langone Medical Center in New York City. Under her leadership, FeminEM strives to achieve gender equality in emergency medicine, as well as providing professional development resources and support for women who have been called to a life in emergency medicine. And she's created what initially started as a blog, but now it's a movement, an amazing movement, which is a multifaceted community comprised of women in medicine all over the world. She's a prolific writer and speaker and advisor on policies supporting women in medicine. She's a published author. She's published papers in numerous medical journals on the topic. And in addition to her work as an advocate and physician, she's a mother to Hannah, Charlie, and Sam. And she lives with her children and her husband, Michael, in Brooklyn, New York. We can see each other because we're on Zoom. And Dara was just humbled and by her work, I think.
See, I actually am putting together my CV for, I'm changing institutions. That's the only time you ever do it, right? It's like
right.
When your life changes. And it's remarkable and humbling to actually see what's happened in the past 3 years around the space of gender equity. And so going through all the talks and the papers and the stuff that's actually happened, it is pretty, it's affirming, I should say, in a lot of ways.
Yes, I'm so impressed with the work that you've done. And as you know, there's a lot of work yet to do, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I read your bio, but on the Doctor's Life podcast, we always want to hear more of your personal story, how you, as we're talking about gender equality and inspiring folks, we're also looking at inspiring somebody that may be listening to the podcast that isn't already a physician who might be interested in medicine or a medical student on their journey. So how did you get interested in medicine in the first place, and how did you get to what you're doing today?
In medicine, the first place was the easy one, right? My mom was a nurse in the ER when I was a kid, and she worked at a very gritty hospital I grew up just fascinated with medicine and emergency medicine specifically, and always knew it was what I wanted to do. I was the friend who always took care of the friends who were sick, and not always good or bad.
Right.
I had to learn medicine somewhere along the way. But I knew medicine was for me. And I was raised by parents. And, when you talk about women in medicine and feminism and stuff like that, I'm one of 3 girls. And I was raised by a mom who works and a dad who was a teacher. And my mom, so they had a very equal relationship when it came to parenting. And I think I've been watching a lot of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg story lately. And I think that she talks about her husband and having this very equal relationship as parents. And I think that framed a lot of what I do in a really remarkable way, unintentionally, or certainly in an unspoken way, like the hidden curriculum. And so I knew I was going to be a doctor, and my parents never said anything else. They were very supportive, and it was going to be what I was going to do. And so I went to college, and I went to medical school, and I went to the local medical school because it was economically viable, and it's the one that accepted me. So
right.
both of those things are good. But SUNY Downstate, where I went, had a remarkable emergency department. Kings County Hospital is one of the original, OGs of emergency medicine, and it's where you want to learn emergency medicine if you're going to be a doctor in emergency medicine. And so I was addicted from day one in what I was doing. I was probably overly confident as a medical student showing up in the ER. I'm like, got my 2 books and my white coat, and then I showed up in the ER, and I'm like, okay, who's going to let me do something? And what was awesome is they started to let me do something. And so I remember one of my first cases when I was a medical student, I was the one that hung out in the ER. I don't know, they just never kicked me out by security. And there was this altercation outside the ER where they had two livery cab drivers at the time who had an altercation, and unfortunately they took out weapons and actually they used knives. And one of the drivers came in with a knife stuck in his head, like literally, like he was sitting up and it had missed everything. It just was basically a scalp wound. And the other one got stabbed in the chest, and actually he didn't do well, and he actually had a thoracotomy, which is, for those of you out there that aren't medical students, we cracked his chest, or they did. I wasn't in the room. I wasn't a doctor. I was a medical student. But after he unfortunately expired, they needed somebody to sew up the body to close it, and I was like, pick me, and I did. And so being a medical student in the ER afforded me this freedom to immerse myself in emergency medicine really early. Mm-hmm. In that same framework, the women's work, the equity and inclusion and the stuff that I do now was born out of a totally different need, which was that once I had become an academic physician, graduated residency, and been in attending, I started my own family with my husband, obviously not by myself, although it's fine if you do. And I realized that I had a whole new set of needs. I had hit every landmark, right? I had gone to medical school when I was supposed to. I had gotten married when I was supposed to. I had gotten pregnant when I was supposed to. All of a sudden, there were challenges that I was facing that were, in all fairness, totally expected. How was I going to balance being pregnant in the ER? How was I going to have maternity leave? And how was I going to come back to work as a doctor and have a baby? And how was I going to create an academic career that allowed me the space to do also this other thing, which is captivating, right? Being a parent is a captivating and wonderful experience that you don't want to marginalize if you can avoid it. And neither gender wants that.
Absolutely.
And so I started using a lot of the tools that I had learned in medicine and networking and social media to kind of bridge this conversation. And that, like any good story on entrepreneurship or mission-based organizations or whatever it is, it basically consumed me. And it quickly transitioned from the side thing I did to help solve problems to the thing that was taking the forefront of what I was doing. And that's kind of the emotional evolution of what FeminEM became.
Right. I love it. And you can tell that you're so passionate about it and so excited about it. And it really shows because FeminEM has really taken off over the last 2 to 3 years. And for those of us who don't know what FeminEM is, a few of us, let's talk about it, what it is, and what you guys are up to.
So FeminEM, so the name, right? Where did it come from? So it's for women in emergency medicine, FeminEM. And we basically did it as this catchphrase to house a website. So the first idea was there are all these women and who are thinking about how do they do all these problem solving the way that I had described. And we needed some place to house a lot of the content that we had written for these newsletters, for these women's organizations. And so I really was like, hey, let's just start a website, right? You can start your own website for like $250 and we'll just house all these articles and people will go there. And, it was very natural and benign and very mission-based. And so we started with we needed a name because you need a domain name. And so we had our domain name and, we had our articles. And then as soon as we had a platform, we started addressing needs because then the platform became the space by which we learned about problems and we solved them. And so one of the stories I tell a lot is about we realized there was a dearth of women speakers in any field of medicine. This is not a new problem. It's certainly not specific even to medicine, right? You go to a finance panel or law panel or anything else in industry, and you can find panels of men, manels if you call it,
right,
and the women. And so, after deliberate conversation with esteemed colleagues who were doing great work in our field, we realized that a lot of the conference organizers actually would have loved to have more women on the stage and actually were champions of equity, but just didn't have the tools to do it. And so how could we give them the tools? And so one of the things we developed was the FeminEM Speakers Bureau. And this was basically taken from an idea of regular speakers bureaus where you could see and choose speakers that you think are talented, except this was curated for women in our field. And it gave us a chance to really highlight any woman that felt that she wanted to be highlighted. We don't qualify women speakers. We don't promote them. We just give them a platform. The same thing is true. We have an honors section. So what does it do? It actually allows women who've won awards to celebrate themselves. So there's a likability bias for women in accomplishments where we know that if women promote themselves socially, they are viewed negatively by society, whereas if men do the same thing, they don't.
That's right.
And so one of the things that FeminEM can do as a platform is absorb the bias against individuals. And that's actually one of the things I talk about a lot in my equity and inclusion conversations, and especially in my lectures, is that when you're in a minority group, regardless of the minority, whether it's race, gender, sexual orientation or sexual identity, religion, cultural, anything, you cannot be the advocate for the change you need because it will seem like you're trying to make an individual concession, right? So asking women to be the change agents for women's equity is not productive. Women can lead the charge, but you cannot try to make individual changes. It won't happen systemically. So we're looking to make systemic changes. And so FeminEM as an organization can advocate for systemic changes for women. And actually, ironically, we're able to advocate for changes for other, affected people that are maybe women of color or women in the LGBT community, because we can really show everybody that there's even less data and support for a double minority woman or a triple minority woman or a double minority male, right? And so all of those conversations we can have in what is the ultimate safe space, and that's what it is. So that's what FeminEM is, and then we've developed other tools and platforms. The most notable now is that we have our own podcast, which is called the FeminEM Podcast, which I'm going to have you on soon. But, it's really a chance to kind of have these conversations that are deeper than just a blog post or a tweet or a Facebook post, but really require a depth of conversation. So one of the ones we had recently was about maternity bias for new mothers based on race and maternal mortality with a woman emergency physician, Jonae Caldoun, who's the health commissioner for the city of Detroit. And Esther Chu is a friend of mine who wrote an article for NBC Think on the risk of mortality and morbidity for women of color after birth. And that's not a conversation you can have on a linear platform. You want to get deep in that conversation. And what Jonae spoke about was that she has bilateral subdural hemorrhages. So those are bleeds in her brain. As an African-American woman who gave birth, who had headaches, who nobody took seriously because for many reasons, but we know there is an element of bias there. So we can have that conversation on our podcast, which is pretty amazing. And then the last thing we have is an in-person conference, which we'll talk about a little bit maybe later. It's just the ability to bring together hundreds and hundreds of women physicians and their allies in a space that promotes equity and talks about the issues we're facing.
Right. So there's a group of physicians that have created FeminEM and are running FeminEM at this point, or?
I have a massive network of people that help support this mission. And so it's great for me to be able to be kind of omnipresent and help kind of promote it on these venues, but without the team of people. I mean, we have a staff of 4 or 5 people that get paid to do work for FeminEM, which is amazing because they're also mostly doctors who get to do this on the side, and they get, talk about a side gig, right? That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, when we met, we were talking about making choices in our medical careers, and you spoke about that some when you were talking about your personal evolution to what you're doing now. And I think that especially when we're talking about women and the multifaceted lives that we lead, that making choices, being able to make choices in our medical careers is really paramount. And as you were saying, that there's a dilemma between what we'd like to do and what's traditional that people do in medicine, what are traditional tracks in medicine, whether they be in academic medicine or whether they be in private practice. and the expectations, not only for ourselves, but from our colleagues and the culture of medicine that affects all of the decisions that we make. So let's talk about making choices in our medical careers. And so I'll leave it to you to start, and then we'll just go from there.
Healthcare as a system is obviously not doing so great, right? And I think that this idea that it's a consumable, like it's something that we kind of have a market-based trade on, actually has affected the careers of physicians in a really, really, really bad way. Traditionally, when men were doctors 30, 40 years ago, and it was also a market-based economy for medicine. You know, the harder you work, the more you got paid, but there was somebody else doing all the other jobs. And my husband and I talk about this a lot. That doesn't mean it was better for men either. Right? So we talk a lot about, with women and medicine, about the idea that now we're burdened with all these things we have to do. And, you know, I don't use the word choice at all when it comes to things that I have to do. So I don't choose to put clothing on my children's backs or make sure that they're fed.
True that.
Neither does my husband. This is something we have to do.
Right.
I told my daughter I don't need to pay for her violin lessons if I don't want to, but I do have to make sure that she has clothing and food. That's not a choice. Making sure somebody is home for my children is not a choice. How I execute that may be. And so traditionally, historically, that was done by men, and women were home taking care of the kids, and that's the way it was. It's not like that anymore. But nobody gave men the choice either, right? They didn't say to them, you're a woman, or because, you know, everything was a heterosexual partnership then. A woman could go to work and she could earn the same money and she could be a doctor and you could be home.
Right.
Right. So that's kind of the history where we got here. Now we're at this point where you add in an increase of consumerism in general, increase in information dissemination, increase in technology, the ability to never be off your phone, the idea that men and women can both be trained as physicians so they both can go to work with enormous debt, right?
Right.
We are not
physicians, so I know.
Right. We all have enormous debt. So the idea of staying home, even in any family, having only one parent that works in most major cities is almost non-viable. It's certainly very difficult where I live in New York City.
Right.
So that's kind of all the framework that sets up expectation. And then we add in things like burnout, right? So in medicine, back to why the system is broken, you have, you know, much more technology, less interpersonal skills. You see patients faster. It's much more siloed, right? So the more specialists we get, the less we take care of people on the whole level.
Right.
And it all kind of contributes to this downward spiral. For me, I have some freedoms that other people don't have, whether it's the opportunity to choose, literally to choose to work less in a traditional environment. And a lot of that, you know, has to do with the options we have in our family, but also has to do with the idea that I kind of created this other thing that can supplement my income that affords me the other things that women want, or I would say even everyone wants. And I only say women because the bar is higher, right? Women, when they go on maternity leave, will almost always reevaluate whether or not they should go back to work. That's like, we do this naturally. Nobody gives you a little note after your baby's born that says, by the way, this is your chance to figure out if you want to be a working parent.
I remember doing it for about 1 second.
Right. And most of us come back, right? Men don't get that choice. Nobody hands them the note, right? So I've reevaluated 4 times whether or not I wanted to come back to work and how I wanted to work, right? I had 3 children, and then I actually had stopping a bomb in this. I donated an organ to my child, and in that time I took a leave of absence the same way. Mm-hmm. And I know that I don't want to work 5 days a week full-time for anybody else, mostly because I want to govern my time. But so does my husband, right? He doesn't have the same options I do. But the options I have now, I've actually created. And that's the difference between what people see from the outside when women, quote-unquote, make choices to stay home versus, I think, where we're going for the future. So FeminEM is a business. And by that I mean that anything that's worth doing, you have to expect somehow is going to support the endeavor itself. Now, it doesn't have to be hugely profitable, but it does have to be able to support itself for your time and effort, or else it's a hobby, okay? And if it's a hobby, it shouldn't take as much time as it does for me. So I spend a lot of time working on policies and lecturing and traveling and the conference, and that requires it to support me. And I don't apologize. What it also affords me is flexibility and passion. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that I am so grateful for, because if you look at anybody in medicine, Those are the two things that we're missing. We went into medicine to feel empowered and impassioned to take care of people, and that's great. We've lost that along the way in the consumerism and the idea of market-based economy and the idea that we have to see as many patients as possible to pay off our debts, and we are doing the EMR, and, all those things have contributed to the lack of passion for us anymore. It bleeds it out of you. And the flexibility. So I work on FeminEM all the time or not at all, depending on the day. Mm-hmm. And I do it in a way that allows me the other pieces of my life that keep me whole. Right. And that is remarkable for me as a parent. But emergency medicine doesn't really afford that level of flexibility all the time. It has other flexibilities. Back to the choices and sustainability in medicine. The other thing that FeminEM allows me, which I think is probably the most important thing anyone can do, is a sense of connectedness to other doctors.
Yes.
There was a recent article in the Harvard Business Review, I think we both talked about this, about women's conferences and how they affect women's careers. And this is true not just for women, but this study was done on women. Aside from the increase in promotion and pay that women sought after going to a women's development conference, what they really noted was that the increase in connectivity amongst physicians, or people, it wasn't physicians, and the sense of inclusion in your community was up 80% for those that had gone to a conference.
Right.
And so I feel like I am constantly engaging with other women in our field, and that reminds me that I'm not alone.
Right.
And I think that that's probably the most important thing that's developed out of FeminEM.
I agree that connection is so important, and you're right that as we're becoming more siloed and not communicating as much from person to person, that this feeling of isolation can be pervasive, and it's great to connect online and groups and all that kind of thing, but I have found that through the Physician Vitality Institute and being able to connect with other, primarily women physicians, but other physicians, male and female physicians, about something that you're passionate about, it gives you so much energy and drive and makes you want to continue to do what you're doing. And it's interesting because in terms of burnout, I've heard at least one lecture by Tate Shanafelt, probably more, where he mentions that they found in the research that in terms of the work that we do as physicians, if we can do 20% of the work that we really like to do that lights us up, that's actually enough. So reaching for the things that you are really passionate about and that you really like to do and creating community around that, as you were saying, is really integral to our sustainability in terms of our careers. So you don't have to be into something that's necessarily outside of patient care. Connecting with each other is so vital. And I think that we're able to do that in so many ways. And one way, as you mentioned, is going to a conference. And I would love for you to talk about the conference that you guys have coming up.
I will say, just, I work one day a week in the ER, and that's actually what I need. I love that. And that's, I said to somebody else that that's my perfect balance, because I do need to see patients and connect them and kind of remind myself. It's part of who I am.
Right.
Even if everything else. But it is enough for me.
Yes.
One day a week. Which is, it's up down from 3, which is what normal emergency doctors do, so it's not a huge drop. So the conference is extraordinary. It is so it's in New York City this year for the second year. We had it last year for the first time. The idea is that it brings together women in medicine and their allies. So it's about, 80 to 90% women, so 10% other, however you define other. And it's not all physicians. It's not all emergency physicians, but it is mostly. And last year we had 250 people. This year we're going to have almost 600 in the main theater, and we may actually be able to have a live stream event for residents in a room adjacent to the theater in the venue, which is amazing.
That's fantastic.
And so we're talking about somewhere between 600 and 800 people in the venue. It is all about the experience of being a woman in medicine in every aspect. So this year's lectures are going to include things like discussing some things like the Equal Rights Amendment and fair pay and equity, some stuff on gender violence as a global issue, some on parenting choices that men are making, the reality of actually being a trans physician and then what that means when you actually transition genders and how you've walked shoes in both genders and what that means actually as a witness, which I think is incredible. Physicians who have had extraordinary interpersonal journeys, whether it comes to being a teenage parent and then watching your child actually pass away at the hands of somebody in your family. It's just like really remarkable stories that all are threaded with the constant theme of, but we're also doctors,
right.
Or we have one PA, or we're in medicine. And that's like a really common thread. I mean, we're a tribe on that level.
Right.
And yet people who are in the audience who aren't physicians, like I say a lot about my mother-in-law or my husband who sat in the audience kind of auditing, they're captivated by it as well. That's just kind of half of the conference is the didactic. So the way we've organized it this year is it's 3 days, a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in New York City. And the Tuesday night is going to be a bunch of kind of wellness events like SoulCycle and museum tours and whatever your jam is as far as connectivity. And then on Tuesday evening, we're having a welcome party at a concert hall in New York City that has, it's like a party venue. So it's called the Highline Ballroom and they have all kinds of events there. And we're taking it over. We actually have that sponsored by a technology company called the Butterfly Network, which has a handheld ultrasound machine. But the reason why that's cool is we're kind of going all tech on it, and it's going to be, it's going to be a great welcome party, but it's about networking and connecting with other physicians. And then on Wednesday night, which is the second night of the conference, we have these networking dinners. So what we do is we basically treat it like it's a big wedding. We take the hundreds of people and we put them at tables at different restaurants because it's New York City, so we have so many restaurants.
Yeah.
And so we make reservations for 10 people, and so there'll be 600 or 700 people divided into 10-person dinners. And for that, you get to network in a longitudinal fashion with chairpersons and with program directors and attendings and residents and fellows and medical students all at one table. And those relationships are, you can't get that anywhere else, and then come back to the last day for the conference. So it's about this kind of journey of connectivity in medicine and humanity and education and professional development. And it's invigorating. And so it's fun to plan. It's awesome. And, we opened our tickets on this Sunday. So I don't know when this is going to air, but on March 4th. And so today is technically March 9th.
Right.
And we are almost sold out of the first round of tickets. And so by the end of this weekend, we'll have 100 tickets left for the whole conference. And that's exciting. I want everyone who wants to come. But I also love the idea that a conference centered around gender equity in medicine is popular.
Right.
That is astounding. So the other business people in medicine are shocked that so many people will commit to a conference 7 months in advance. I mean, we get CME.
Right.
It's remarkable how many people are willing to stand with us and say this is important. One of the other things we did this year, which is pretty amazing, was we allowed academic departments to pre-purchase tickets for their faculty and residents as we called it a foundation sponsor. So as a foundation for gender equity. We had to turn people away. We had a limited number because we didn't want to oversell the tickets beforehand. We had more departments that wanted to do this than we had available tickets.
Wow.
When you talk about championing change, the idea that we can empower chair people to send their physicians and residents, and not all women, to a conference like this as a support for them feeling both empowered and inspired. I couldn't ask for better allies.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing thing to watch.
Yeah, it is an amazing thing to watch, and I'm so inspired by the work that you guys are doing. So if someone's listening to the podcast and they still want to try to get, if there's any tickets left, or at least connect with you guys, how can they do that, Sarah?
Tickets are available on our website, so it's www.FeminEM.org, and then there's a tab for Fix 18. Even if we sell out, there will be a waiting list for tickets, so if somebody cancels, we are certainly happy to facilitate an exchange where somebody can get somebody else's ticket. We know there's going to be some cancellations. There was last year, and it is far in advance, so people's lives will change. We know that, and we have actually built that into our infrastructure. And then for residents, we hope to have this additional experience that we can offer more residents tickets and the opportunity to go to network at least and be part of the event, even if it's virtually for the lectures. And so that's exciting. And so and if anybody has any issues, they can always find me on Twitter or DM me there or just through the website. Even just emailing info@FeminEM.org will get to me, and that will help. We want everyone to feel like there's an opportunity for them to become a part of this.
Wonderful. Dr. Kass, it has been such a pleasure and so fun to talk to you today about the great work that you guys are doing and about choices in medicine. Till next time, everybody, I hope everyone stays happy and healthy, and take care.
You've been listening to the Doctor's Life Podcast with Diane Ansari-Winn, MD. Go to www.dianeansari-winn.com to read show notes, listen to past episodes, Share your comments and show ideas and pick up your free PDF and video of easy and proven strategies that will melt your daily stress away. That's www.dianneansari-winn.com.